Hi, everyone. As you can probably already tell, this week's newsletter is going to be a little different. Mental health has always been an important issue close to my heart. Disorders like anxiety and ADHD have affected me from an early age. I've regularly gone to therapy, and last year I used transcranial magnetic stimulation to treat depression. Mental health has always been important, which is why I've always been frustrated to see it dismissed, minimized, or otherwise not taken seriously. Unfortunately, that behavior trends highly amongst men and is incredibly noticeable in the world of sports. Recently, I wanted to learn more about what Major League Baseball is doing to integrate mental health care into baseball, how players are responding to it, and what challenges lay ahead. So I sat down with Dr. Tess Palmateer, the mental health coordinator for the New York Mets, to get her insight on the emergence of mental health care in baseball. We had a great conversation, which you can listen to, watch, or read here on Not From Boston. Please like and share this interview, and subscribe if you haven't already. Here's Dr. Tess Palmateer. Dr. Palmateer, thank you so much for being here. I wanted to start with a question that I kind of find myself asking friends of mine or people that I meet, especially now that, so I've worked in the film industry for the last few years, and the difference between what people think I do and what I actually do is pretty massive. And so I'm curious, what do people think you do? And what do you do?
Yes. That's a question I get all the time when I say I'm a sports psychologist and people go, "Oh, cool. Hmm. So what is that exactly?"
Yeah.
So I think some people have the sense of, yes, I'm available to provide therapy to players. Also doing some of the more performance enhancement. So how I describe my role is providing mental health care for all of our players, helping them get connected to the best mental health care. That could be our internal resources or connecting to folks in the community. The role I'm in currently with the Mets, I'm the mental health coordinator. So, in this role, my primary responsibility is mental health care. At our organization, we distinguish between mental health and mental performance. And so, in previous roles I've held, I've done both. So, the making sure our well-being is on point, navigating situations outside of sport, but as well as, I should say, how do we perform at a high level and do so consistently? So I've been in this role for about a year now, so still sort of learning. And while us as an organization, again, we kind of distinguish between mental health and mental performance, we
Mhm.
recognize that there is so much overlap, and oftentimes players can benefit from working with both departments and even for us to collaborate. So, yeah, I don't know if people have a good sense of what I do. Perhaps with things becoming a little bit more commonplace in media, people have a better sense. But um, yeah, again, mental health care for our players is really, really the primary role.
Did you grow up a baseball fan, or were you a Mets fan before you had a chance to work for the organization, or is sports, just broadly speaking, just your thing?
Yeah, so I grew up definitely a sports fan. I think it's helpful to share a little bit about my background. I'm actually originally from Canada. So doing all of the stereotypes right by saying that my dad was a professional hockey player. We grew up a hockey family. And he had retired by the time I was born, but then took on the role of scouting. So hockey was kind of what we talked about. I would go to the rink with him sometimes. From a playing standpoint, I kind of played everything growing up. In high school, I was on our basketball, cross country, volleyball, soccer, golf, tons of different teams. Once I got to college, volleyball was my primary sport. Still play a little bit of pickup here and there, but I'd say the sport I play most common now, recreationally, of course, is golf. Um, I did not spend a ton of time in the baseball community.
Mhm.
So that's been quite the learning curve of just some of the nuances of the culture and the people involved in baseball. But what I think is really cool about my role is much of the well-being and even performance principles can be applied across various sports. So while there's
Yeah.
been a learning curve, I feel like a lot of what I do can be kind of cross sport, which is really great.
And what are some of those nuances that make baseball a little different?
I was just talking to a colleague actually about this today. I think the minor league system is very
Mm,
unique, right? We don't see players get drafted and then in the big leagues that following year, like we might see
right.
in some other sports. So with it taking maybe 4+ years for players to navigate their way through the minor league system, I think that that's one big nuance. Um, I think the makeup of our players is fairly unique. We have, of course, our domestic players, many coming from the US. We got a couple fellow
Mm,
Canadians on board at the
right.
Mets. But then we also have a really big Latin population. So we have folks coming from the Dominican, Venezuela, Colombia, so forth. And so stepping into this role, I knew we had folks from all over, but
Mhm.
I think it really hit me when I was thinking about the difference between working in a college space, which I had previously, to this space. If folks were enrolling in a US university, they needed to have some sort of English proficiency. That's not always the case here. We have some players coming that have had very minimal exposure to, um, I guess, English, to put it broadly. So I
Mhm.
think that has put there's been a lot of emphasis in our organization of how even us as English speaking staff, how can we learn Spanish, make an effort, get to know their culture. Um, so I think that that has been an interesting kind of difference as well. And even how their journey, they might be in our academy for a couple of years and then navigate their way to the US. So those are a couple things that I think are a little bit unique about baseball. Though admittedly, I haven't worked in other pro settings. So
Yeah, but there is, I mean, that the minor league system on its own, like that is a huge difference. It's a whole other, I mean, it's a whole other league. Uh,
mhm.
so it's, I can understand that that is definitely going to take some adjustment. What drew you to the mental health piece of it?
It's funny because I did not know what I wanted to do from a career standpoint, probably till midway through my undergrad. I went to college just thinking I'd like to play volleyball. I want to go where I'm going to have the best opportunity, where the coach is outstanding. I'm going to have great teammates. And it was actually during that time that I struggled myself on the court. I was struggling with my confidence, like many athletes we chat with. We were our own worst critic.
Mhm.
And so it was during that time my dad had shared, he's saying, during our scouting process, we're working with this sports psychologist, and maybe you could connect with her. I'm like, I'll take any help I can get, please. So
Yeah.
I met with her and I was like, wow, I was a psychology undergrad student at the time. Didn't really know what I wanted to do with it, but thought psychology was fascinating. Having grown up and kind of lived in the world of sports, I was like, this is outstanding. I can do both. And so at that point, that was where it really all clicked for me. And I was like, okay, I need to find myself into these sports psychology classes, figure out what the next step would be. In this case, it was I pursued my master's after the undergrad. So that sort of locked me in. And at first, I really thought, oh, I just want to do the performance stuff, right? How can we perform at a high level? How do we be consistent? How do we go from good to great? It probably wasn't until I did my PhD at University of North Texas, where it was a counseling psychology program first. We have tremendous sport experience and exposure, but it was during that time that I was thinking, like, wow, how are we expecting players to meet all of these demands if they're not okay off the field or off the court? And
Right.
recognizing too, sometimes in these positions, folks look at them and think, wow, they've got everything. What could they be sad about? Or what would even stress them out? They got more money than anything. And then sitting and chatting with them, of recognizing they're going through some of the similar stressors that us everyday people are going through. So I think uh again, it really goes back to my undergrad, that exposure there. But if I rewind even further, I
Mhm.
remember sitting in the ranks with my dad back when Palm Pilots were a thing, and I'm entering some scores with him and asking, why do you like this guy over this guy? And he's pointing out some behaviors of, like, you notice how this guy like, look what he's doing on the bench, or how this guy goes into the corner. And he was really all talking about the mental. He could, he knew everything from the physical or skill standpoint, but he was really digging in and asking coaches about the players. So I think even from a young age, I was really curious about the mental side of sport.
The point you made about kind of touching on the stakes of performance and people saying, players have it all, something I am definitely guilty of myself. Um, but I in preparing for this, I was kind of thinking about how, in our cases in the workplace, if we make a mistake, the repercussions of those mistakes kind of stay within that workplace, between us and our supervisor or coworkers. But when, for example, Aaron Judge drops a fly ball in the World Series on this massive stage where millions of people are watching, like that is going to stay with him for the rest of his career. And I'm just curious, how, in your experience, how do players cope with that? How do they deal? And do you have a role in helping them navigate that?
Yes. So one of my education sessions that I'm going to be doing with our players this year is really navigating how social media can impact mental health and well-being. So some literature has already explored, what does mindless scrolling do and how does that impact us? That is kind of a different can of worms. But what
Yeah.
you're pointing out, depending on the player, maybe what level they're at or what round they were drafted in, there are so many eyes on them. So after a rough game, if they go check Twitter or go look at Instagram or start just even looking at news articles, like
Yeah.
you're going to see some not so pretty things. And so something that I've been exploring and we've been talking internally about is, yeah, what can we do to better support our players? One
Mm.
strategy, of course, is, after a bad game, don't go directly to Twitter and search your name.
Yeah.
Whether it's a bad game or not, I do try to teach folks, be mindful of what you're consuming because it does impact the way we think, the way we're evaluating social comparisons. And so something that I think is really cool that the NCAA and the International Olympic Committee are doing are what are these resources that can essentially prevent some of the online abuse. So I'd be happy to share some articles with you because I'm blanking on what the name of the app is called, but one of my colleagues, Jeff Reuser, had presented at the MLB mental health meetings this summer.
Mm.
And some of that information then was funded by the NCAA, and now they're putting it into practice so we can kind of prevent the negative comments from going onto people's posts or just the harassment that takes place. Because
Yeah.
as you've probably seen, it's not just comments about their play, but it does get pretty nasty. So trying to think about what we as an organization can do to protect our players and limit the exposure to some of that stuff that is likely going to impact their well-being.
I would love to hear about kind of, yeah, the stigma and the ways in which masculinity stands in the way sometimes of mental health in sports.
Of course, great question. I think even reflecting over my time from undergrad to where I am in my career now, in undergrad, I don't even know if there was an undergraduate college counseling center on campus. I didn't think I had a teammate that had a mental health concern. We sure as heck never talked about it. Um,
Yeah.
so that was not that long ago, like less than
Right.
maybe a decade ago. And
That's still
so
not that long ago.
right. So it is even just thinking about my career journey, the amount that mental health has increased and being talked about, it's incredible. Um, and I think in college spaces, there's been some policies in place that have really pushed for mental health care. There's been various campaigns like Holinsky's Hope does a great job of pushing Student Athlete Mental Health Week and creating conversations around mental health and increasing resources for student athletes. But then even in the pro space, I mean, the professional athletes that are speaking out about mental health, they're just doing tremendous work. To see again the folks who have it all, who are these sort of invincible heroes, if they can speak out about struggles that they've had and how it was helpful to ask for help, that's going to go a long way. And I think it really has. So folks like Kevin Love, Tamar DeRozan, Michael Phelps, three amazing male
Yeah.
athletes, and they've all spoken out about this and done some really cool work in the mental health space as well.
Hmm.
It actually reminds me too, I just read this article. The title was something along the lines of Michael Phelps is pleading with men to go to therapy. And in
Yeah.
there, he talks about I didn't want to ask for help because it felt like a sign of weakness, and maybe I was giving my competitors an edge. In some ways, I get that. People hate asking for help, and men, a lot of people, or a lot of men are socialized to think like, I gotta tough it out, I'll figure it out on my own. Don't ask for help when my big approach is trying to shift how we're thinking about mental health. Why is that so different? Because if you are struggling with your swing,
Hmm.
you would probably go talk to your coach about it. You'd probably watch film. You'd go into the cages, get some extra work, whatever it might be. But if we're struggling from a mental health standpoint, asking for help seems odd. So I try to point out those discrepancies of like, oh, that's true. I do ask for help. Um, and so I think being in this space has been a challenge if I'm being transparent, right?
Yeah.
We know that men are less likely to ask for help. I mean, even the literature shows that men, their help-seeking behavior is just lower than women if we're kind of just categorizing in the two
Yeah.
genders. And so there's a little bit more, I guess, work that I put in to sort of build relationships with players and earn their trust. Then we
Hmm.
think about the layer of sport, and I think everyone knows like the no crying in baseball quote. And
Yeah.
so, we're what sort of messaging are players receiving, both implicitly and pretty explicitly at times. So I think for me too, trying to bring awareness to our staff so that they can reinforce well-being. And some folks, both players and staff, have been pretty outstanding of like, hey, well, I spoke to Tess and it was really helpful. Or during
Hmm.
my playing career, I struggled with X, Y, and Z. And so I think the more we talk about it, we can break down the stigma. But even to go with another whole other layer here, again, talking about we have so many players coming from other countries where
Hmm.
mental health isn't even talked about. Or if I say I'm the mental health provider, they're like, oh, don't like, I don't want to even be associated with you. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. So there's a lot of education that goes into place as well, and just trying to be patient and meet folks where they're at.
Hmm. Yeah. I totally agree with just, talking about it more and getting it out in the open to destigmatize all the kind of aspects of mental health. I, for one, was really struggling last year with depression, and then I did TMS, which I was very, I think, scared of going in because it felt, pretty intense, and I won't shut up about it to people. I'm just like, this
Yeah.
is like, not only did it work, and that in and of itself is just kind of a miracle and amazing, but it's just kind of crazy cool. Like magnets on your, like, somehow make your brain better. It's awesome. And just not being really afraid of the judgment in a weird way has been like very empowering. It's very nice.
Yes, it was one of my favorite things when I was working in the college space. There'd be like, I'd be at lunch with football or one of our teams, and I'd sit down and have lunch with them. And then someone else would be like, hey, Tess, we're meeting at 2, right? Yell it in front of the whole team. And in my head, I'm like, yes, this is great. And then someone else will look at me and be like, how do I set up an appointment with you? And just like that, the more we're able to be open about it,
Yeah.
it just can have such a cool impact. And it's one of my favorite things when people say like, "Oh, my therapist insert whatever they
Mhm.
learned," or "Oh, I can't, I got therapy."
Yeah.
Good. Let's normalize that the same way when we say, "I got to go to a dentist appointment," you know?
Yeah. I think I'm more overdue for a dentist appointment than I am for therapy, but point taken.
Yeah.
I want to go back to briefly when we split off the question about between stigma and then performance as it relates to mental health. I would love to hear more about that because I did read your study on, whether personality is a predictor, and I was curious about that, and I would love to hear more.
Mhm. I think it's pretty hard for me to say conclusively, like mental health is directly correlated to performance. I think
Mhm.
we can all, I mean, even the names I just mentioned, Michael Phelps, Kevin Love, DeMar DeRozan, Simone Biles, the list goes on. Folks can still be doing really great things, even if they're not kind of at 100% or close to with mental health. Where it's interesting is sometimes sport is their safe place. So outside of sport, they might not be doing well, but sport is where they feel confident, where they feel safe, where they feel supported. So it is interesting and nuanced where I think the correlation between good mental health and well-being and performance can come into place is sometimes if we're not doing well from a mental health standpoint, that could impact, let's say, our appetite. Maybe we're losing weight because we're not eating enough. That's going to increase our risk for injury. That's going to also increase or impact our energy availability. Maybe we're eating too much and now we're overeating, we're gaining weight, we're losing some of our speed. Can impact our sleep. If we're struggling with sleep, I'm sure we can all know this of when you're you haven't slept well, you're kind of cranky, things just aren't processing as quick as it normally does. Those are just two examples. And so we also know depression or anxiety can impact our attention, our information processing, impacts the way we show up in our relationships. Like it's just so in everything that we do. So
Mhm.
from my perspective, something that I really try to push is mental health is a tool for performance excellence, or mental health is a tool for excellence on and off the field. One of my colleagues, I can't remember the quote exactly, works with the USOPC, but he's like, we can all be really good, but why not be great? And or if you're
Yeah.
great, could you be even better? And I think that mindset of like chasing excellence is a really cool way to frame it and moves away from the reactive deficit problem mentality that sometimes mental health holds. So, if we are checking all the boxes, good sleep, good nutrition, we're feeling
Mhm.
supported in our relationships, we're content, our mood is great, we're able to focus. I think that's just going to help performance. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And then kind of diverting to the bit about personality, I
Mm.
think that is fascinating. My research was for my dissertation just like a snapshot, right? I was limited in what I can do given, I'm
Yeah.
using publicly available statistics and so not the top-notch quality I would love to kind of engage in someday, but I think personality is generally it's a pattern of behaviors. We're assessing the likelihood of someone to behave in a certain way, but I don't think it's exactly this perfect correlation. And we all know, I mean, you can reflect on how you show up in your different relationships. You might be different with your parents than you are with a professor, and you're probably a little bit different between those two than you are with your best friend. So, context, relationships, are we under stress? Those are all things that are going to impact us. So, I think personality can be a piece of the puzzle or help us kind of know how to support players. But at the end of the day, there's so many pieces that contribute to performance. I think our personality or like our makeup is just a part of it.
Yeah. So I wonder, kind of taking all of the things that we've talked about, social media, mental performance, personality, and stigma, you know, looking ahead 5 years from now, where do you hope sports, uh, where sports mental health has evolved?
I think in my dream world, people, we would have plenty of resources available at our sport organizations. My hope is that people would be widely accepting of players and staff utilizing the resources, not having to be worried about how mental health history or treatment might impact their value as a player. If I get traded and they know I'm taking antidepressants, is that going to impact my value? I would love for that not to be a question. I don't think we're there yet.
Is
Um,
that something that does impact the value of players, is like what medications they're taking?
I am so not involved in those
Okay.
conversations.
So,
There's just fear, right? Because if we
yeah.
think about the physical health component, if we're looking to acquire a player, or a team's looking to acquire a player, we need availability. If they've had, let's say, Tommy John surgery, where are we at? Or if they've had a number of strains or tears and surgeries, it does impact how they perceive them. It's all about risk management. And so I think I feel fortunate to be in an organization that really prioritizes mental health, and they really, in my eyes, I feel like we really care about our players as people, and that's why they brought me in, and we've been able to build up our resources, and I'm getting, and by resources, I mean even people power, but I'm getting the resources to do that. And so I think it's something that we really uh, value. But again, I'm not in conversations behind closed doors, and I don't even know how other organizations are
Yeah.
kind of conceptualizing that.
Right. No, I didn't mean to assume otherwise. I just, when you said
Mhm.
concern about antidepressants and value, I was like, I was, that kind of threw me for a second.
Sorry, sorry. And
No,
again, I
no, it's
think
all
that that's
good.
one of those sometimes unfounded fears, but
Yeah.
knowing too that this is folks' livelihoods, so they're trying to be as protective as they can be.
My last question for you, and this has been fantastic, by the way. My last question is, uh, what are you most proud of from your work in 2024, and what is one of your goals for 2025?
Hmm. Okay. I gonna try to think on the fly on this one.
Okay, I know it's
Um,
the hard one.
I do think 2024, I came into the Mets with a vision of what I wanted to build, how I can support players, what policies I can have in place. But I think what I did a pretty good job at was just sort of slowing down and building relationships. It was my intention to get to know the players,
Mhm.
provide a little bit information about, what resources do we have available, but also just how are you? Like you just became a father. How is that? How's the arm
Yeah,
feeling? Holy cow, after, X number of months, you got to throw the ball today. How did it feel? And I think just really building those relationships with players. And then also feel really lucky to have done that with our staff as well. We have some really wonderful staff, and having to just sit down and have these conversations and get to know each other and share meals together, um, I think we've been mutually able to kind of grow. And so that's been pretty cool. I think I've learned, I don't think I have learned a ton over the last year. But really all starts with just connecting as people. Um, I think moving forward, what's my goal or what am I looking forward to for 2025?
one of your goals for 2025.
Okay. Two-parter. A
Okay.
personal goal, I need to improve my Spanish.
Yeah.
We're lucky too. We get some support with that from our organization. And so I will get back. I'll tell my, go to text my teacher back right now, actually. But I want to improve my Spanish. And I say that because we have so many players that are, again, are coming from other countries, and they're immersed into this culture very quickly. I can only imagine how overwhelming that is. And so for me to be able to connect with them, I think will go a long way if I can ease their transition, and also just demonstrate that I care about them just as much as I care about our domestic players. And with that, I'm also really excited we were able to hire a new contracted provider who is bilingual. So now we'll have someone in-house that can build the relationships, meet them where they're at. When we do educational sessions, we don't have to pull in a translator because it's not the smoothest, right?
Right.
So I think I am so excited to broaden our reach this year. Feel like I have my feet underneath me, have some really good relationships, and just build from what's gone on this last almost exactly a year, actually.
That sounds so exciting, and I wish you guys the best of luck with that. And I mean, I am a Red Sox fan, but good luck to the Mets this year.
Thank you.
um, Dr. Tess Palmateer, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. This has been so much fun.
Yes, agreed. Thank you so much for having me. Always happy to connect. So thank you.
Thank you so much.